This is Sam Piccolotti with NZDFit, the No Zero Days Life, coming to you with a new episode today, and super excited to be able to introduce this guest to the audience. I've been following her career for quite a while. I think many of you will probably recognize her immediately as well, and her success in the endurance world. But today we're going to chat with Hillary Allen. Hillary's career as an endurance athlete has not been straightforward. Through injuries, setbacks, and unexpected challenges, Hillary's had to rethink what she considers impossible. Early in her career, Hillary earned the nickname Hillygoat when she was proved her ability to run fast in steep technical mountain terrain, a style of running known as skyrunning. Since then, she has raced all over the world, racking up wins and course records, establishing herself as one of the best mountain ultra runners in the world. In 2017, she had a life-threatening accident where she fell 150 feet off a ridge line during a Skyrace in Tromsø, Norway. She was told she would never run again. After several years of rehab and recovery, Hillary made a full recovery and returned to elite level racing some of her longest and most challenging events post-accident. She maintains the belief that your best athletic days are ahead of you if you're willing to work hard for what you love. Hillary also studies and teaches science using a master's degree in neuroscience and physiology and structural biology. She is also a trail running coach and a gravel cyclist. Hillary Allen, welcome.
Hey, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for the introduction.
You bet. Yeah, super excited. There's so much to talk about. As I just mentioned to you, I just got done reading your book. For those folks who are listening, you're going to want to go find Out and Back by Hillary Allen, a runner's story of survival against all odds. It is available on Amazon because that's where I picked it up. And any other places you'd like to point folks to pick up that book?
Yeah, so and you also listen to it on for audiobooks. So I actually had the pleasure of recording my own book. So I think that's an extra special little treat. But then just your local bookstores. I'm in the Front Range in Colorado, and I know like major stores like Barnes and Noble will carry it, but pretty much, if you go to your local bookstore and request it, they'll definitely send it there. So
awesome. Yes, and I did pick up the audio piece before I got the hard copy or the paperback, actually. So it's awesome. You just mentioned something that you got to do your own audio publishing on the book too. So that's really cool.
I actually requested that I could do it. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it time wise, and I'm certainly not a professional voiceover actress, but I thought it was really special to be able to do it myself. I kind of decided that after I listened to some people who were going to audition for it, and I was like, no, I need to read it.
I think the readers will probably come away with the same sentiment that I have from the audio version and hearing your voice, because I believe you get a really great perspective into your personality and, with the inflections that you utilize during the reading, if you will. It gives you a real sense as to who you are. So I think that was a great choice. And I think it resonates really well. So nicely done. Well, I wanted to, some of the folks we're going to talk about, some of your successes and of course your comeback. But I'd like to dive for a minute into your early life, because one of the things that I found so interesting about you, besides the fact that you must be really smart, you're well educated, but I want to go back all the way to something I read in the book about career day in kindergarten, because there aren't many. First of all, I don't know how many people remember career day in kindergarten. But not only do you remember it, but you had it all figured out pretty much, right? It was envisioned from very early in your years as to what you wanted to do. Which, as you read the book, folks, you're going to start to understand really the depth and the dynamic of how incredibly determined you must be as an individual. But tell us a little bit about growing up.
Yeah. So, oh man, you referenced like I can't not, forget that moment. I can't not remember that moment in kindergarten of like basically I had definitely had it all figured out. My parents were, scientists, they're professors at Colorado State University. And so for me, it was just normal. Like I knew not only was I going to college, but I knew that I needed to figure out a way to go to graduate school because I wanted to, do these big things. And so, yeah, for career day, for kindergarten, little 5-year-old Hillary dressed up as an entomologist. And I went to career day with my little bug net and my my insect collection, which consisted of not only, butterflies, because I know like a little girl, like, butterflies, but I also had like spiders and beetles and like wasps and all that stuff in there. And, I stood up in front of my kindergarten class and I was like, I want to be an entomologist and get my PhD. And everyone else was like, what? um, and yeah, that was me. I mean, obviously I was a super cool kid, as you could tell. But I just describe myself as just like a big nerd and primarily just like a science nerd. I grew up in a house where, I was just encouraged to be curious, to ask questions, not only about, the physical world, how the world worked, how things worked, but also, to be curious about, the physical condition. So my father was a big runner. My mom was very active. And so, I was just encouraged to play and go outside and play sports. And yeah, growing up, basically, my parents, like I said, they're professors. And so we had the summers off, they did, from teaching. And so my sister and I and the dog and my parents would take the camper van and we'd go, tour the United States. And, I was doing this even before I could walk. Like my mom had me on like a little baby Bjorn where my like, hands and feet were like dangling out and I could like grab things. But, I was doing that before I could walk. And then, I think I like learned to walk like outside, like on a trail. Um, but yeah, that's kind of just what it was. If I wasn't, studying something in school that interested me, I was outside playing sports. And
So what were some of the sports? Because I think I was surprised to learn that you actually went to college on a tennis scholarship. So it's not like your parents. Yeah, I mean, obviously the influence of science and and education were highly influenced, but it's not like running was stuck in your face. That's something you discovered much later. So tell us about early sports and exposure there.
yeah, so so I mean, running was still there, like, but it was more for fun. It was just a way to kind of get outside and explore. I mean, I was in, but my as I mentioned, my father was a competitive runner. He's a very, very good runner. But my older sister, actually, she was fast. And but as many runners, maybe, like at the collegiate level or if they've just been running their whole life and not playing other sports, they don't have this thing called coordination, like, catching balls and things like this. And my sister was definitely that way, but I, on the other hand, had a bunch of coordination and like athleticism. And so those kind of sports more interested me. And also just from my curiosity and like maybe competitive nature, I wanted to play sports with the boys. And so I played flag football, I played volleyball, I played softball, I played rugby. My father's British, so he was extra proud of that one. Yeah, and then I've happened to discover tennis. But it wasn't until I'm missing all these sports I played. I played like intramural basketball, swimming, like all of these different things. I tried pretty much every sport. But it wasn't until my freshman year of high school that I discovered tennis. And I liked it because it kind of exploited my tenacious just tendencies, and it encouraged those. And so it was, not only was it physically demanding from like an endurance point of view, but it had this strategy that I really liked. and that if you could kind of like get inside the head of like your opponent, or like
Mm-hmm.
figure out the strategy of how best to like beat this person, or like exploit weaknesses, it was just something I really liked. And so I worked really hard, and I ended up getting a scholarship to play in college. So I was between academics and the tennis scholarship, I had kind of my education like taken care of. So
That's awesome. And so undergrad, where did you do your undergraduate work?
yeah, actually, so it was in Iowa. And you would say,
No.
oh, like, because I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, but I
Yeah.
knew that I wanted to do a liberal arts type of education. And so in Iowa, they have an incredible, incredible liberal arts, like a bunch of colleges to choose from. And so that's kind of what landed me out there. And I majored in chemistry. Organic chemistry, in fact, was like my emphasis. Ended up having a minor in Spanish. And because I tried to fit in everything into those 4 years. So not only was I playing tennis at a high level, which in college it's year round, then I was in like student body government. I also studied abroad in Spain, and I was taking a bunch of these hard science classes. So yeah.
And I want to comment for a minute on the academic piece, because that was a very sought after and determined path for you. You were from a very young age looking at a PhD,
Right.
pursuing a PhD, and somewhere along the line, through your college experience, you had been introduced to running. I love the story. I'm going to ask you to share with some folks. I think the incident took place in Golden, Colorado, or somewhere in that vicinity, where you were out for a trail run with some friends, where you earned your name Hillygoat. Do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I think the pursuit of athletics and academics has been closely linked. Like I didn't want to do one without the other. So when I was in graduate school, for now like a PhD program in neuroscience, um, I kind of was burnt out with tennis, and I started to discover running just because, I did it as a child. It was there, it was in my family. And it was so simple. All I needed was a pair of running shoes and I could do it wherever I was. And I got hooked up with this lady running group. Like it was women only, and like they were in their early 50s and met at like 5 a.m. It was like half a mile from where I lived in Denver. So it was perfect. I started running with them. And then one of them happened to be on like into trail running. And so that's kind of what introduced me to there. And then once I got more into trail running, I ended up meeting this guy on a trail and we ended up dating. And so as I was getting into trail running, like he was into 100-mile races and really good at them. And I was just discovering this, it's like cue the Disney music, which is like a whole new world, kind of what I felt like I was living. Um, and is that Jasmine? I forget. I think so. And so we're out on this, like, so basically he's showing me the ropes. Him and his friends are showing me the ropes, and I'm like, getting into this trail world. And so we're on a trail run, and actually it was Boulder, I believe, where we kind of went on this iconic trail run. We're up like Green Mountain or Bear Peak. We're kind of going to link some of the toughest peaks in the Boulder skyline. And I told myself, I was like, okay, like I'm kind of nervous because I was going with him and two of our mutual friends, and they were all experienced trail runners. And I was like, okay, well, if they're too fast, like I'll just go my pace. Like it's fine. Like I'm just gonna try it. Like it's gonna be beautiful. Like let's go. And as we kind of got into it, and it got steeper and more rocky and like more technical, like my boyfriend at the time kept on, I think, like waiting for me to fall back, and I just like didn't stop. And I think I actually like talked more and more as like the rest of them fell silent. And once we reached the top, I kind of just like was like looked behind me. I'm like, wait, how did I get in front? Like, and it was then
You
that
didn't realize you were that far ahead, and you had taken these experienced runners and crushed them on this ascent.
right. And I was like kind of in disbelief of, of myself. And so I like looked back and I'm like, what? And then as I was like kind of like taking it all in. And then, when they caught up and they were saying, they're like, oh man, like you're built for this. Like you're like a goat out here. I'm going to start calling you the Hillygoat. And like the nickname like stuck ever since.
It definitely did, and I think well coined. So kudos to that boyfriend. So give us a sense, because I'm looking at your race career, and let me ask. In the book, you have your running stats that date back to June of 2012. Was that at the point where you had started racing professionally, or was that prior to?
Yeah, so that was before. I kind of included that just as like the start kind of ultra running. I had run my first marathon, I believe it was December 2011, and that was a road marathon. And yeah, that's kind of just basically when I started running distance. And so 2011 was literally when I started running in general. And so then, I had started in that, like, in graduate school that August. And then by December, I was running my first marathon. And yeah, so when I actually had to take kind of a step back from running in like 2013. I didn't really run that many races. I'd only done a couple, because graduate school was really tough at that time and I had to put in a bunch of hours. I mean, graduate school, even when I was, running and in graduate school, I was working about 60 to 70 hours a week and then getting into running. So like, I didn't have a life. I just was doing the things that I loved and kind of prioritizing my life that way. And it wasn't until 2014 that I actually decided to put together a race schedule. And that's when I, ended up doing these races that were kind of like made for me, I felt, with this nickname of the Hillygoat. And there were these sky races in the US. So these like notoriously steep and technical races where you do like a 50-kilometer run, and gain 12,000 feet kind of on average. But I loved it. And I ended up like just by chance entering into these different races just because I liked them and they seemed interesting. And I ended up doing really well. And I won a couple of the races and I ended up winning the US Skyrunning series that year in 2014. And then that is kind of what propelled me to sign with the North Face.
Okay, I'm looking here, 2014 US Skyrunning Ultra Series, first place overall winner. And where was this?
So this was basically the series.
So,
yeah. So basically that year I had competed in the Speedgoat 50K, the Run the Rut 50K, and it was the Aravepia running the Flagstaff Skyrace.
Yeah, let me give folks just an understanding of what, because you kind of hit upon the skyrunning genre of the sport. I think it's probably foreign even to a lot of people that are runners that don't really understand that piece. But let me give you a sense as to what the vertical game looked like on some of these races, aka Hillygoat. So 2014 June, the Bighorn Trail, which by the way I'm heading there this June to pace a friend, so we should probably talk at some point. But 6,000 to 10,000 vertical feet. Then in July that same year, Slibbard Ski Resort in Utah, the Speedgoat 50 that you mentioned, 12,200 vertical feet of gain. In September, you ran Run the Rut in Big Sky, Montana with 10,000 vertical feet. And then the Flagstaff Peaks 55K at 10,263 feet. So that is part of the series that you're referring to. And you took first overall that year in that series. That's just freaking incredible. So yeah, certainly you know, as people are going to learn about you, and I must compliment you may have been built to run, but you're built for so many other things. It's truly apparent. when you start to discover more about you in the book, and it's really quite inspiring. But this is nuts. And then, so did that launch you into a professional career?
Yeah. So, and it's so funny because like all of these things, they might not seem fun to a lot of people, but it was really fun for me, and it still is. And that's kind of how I approached running in general. It's just, I loved it so much. So I just wanted to do it. And so I really like that if you do something a lot or you work hard at it, that you see these results, and that just fits my personality so well. And so it was fun to me to see that progress and to have these really big, almost scary goals. But then it was just fun to me. And so, yeah, after that 2014 season, I was kind of getting the quote unquote calls from sponsors or just interest in, from different sponsorships. And it wasn't until like late in the fall, even into the winter, that I got a call from North Face and decided to kind of like take a chance on running. And I kind of was signed with them as like kind of a test run. Like they didn't pay me anything. They kind of gave me a kit to run. It was kind of like an ambassadorship, but I started that in 2015.
And then you were off to Europe. I'm looking here.
Yeah.
Marathon du Mont Blanc in Chamonix, France.
Yeah.
20,000 vertical feet with a third place. So, yeah, well warranted. Obviously, if you're looking at the placings, you certainly had a prowess for the sport that must have been innate in you. So, you had an early, very successful launch, and then into more professional tempo of ultra running in 2015. And as folks will come to learn in your book, and we can discuss, in 2017, while racing in Norway, things took a pretty big shift.
Yeah. And so kind of at this point, I had decided in 2015, to kind of take a break from science. I decided to get my master's as opposed to my PhD, and take a chance on running and see if, I could do this. I just needed a break from school. I wanted to, do something out there. And I told myself, just give it a year and see where it goes. And it actually, turned into many years. But so basically how my structure of the year is, I would use my master's degree and I would teach at a small college. And then in May, when the school year was over, I would literally like gather all my papers and like grade them on the plane as I was off to Europe and like post the grades and then like forget about it. And I would then race on these the World Skyrunning series circuit that happened, races between, May to August and sometimes, September. Most of those were in Europe, and I'd finish it off with like coming back for the school year and do a couple maybe international trips later in September and October. So it's kind of on this train since 2015. And in 2017, I was on the World Skyrunning series circuit, and the final race of the season brought me to Norway. And ironically, I was actually winning the World Skyrunning series. And that had been my goal, is to, to like be number one in the world at this sport that I loved. And I was kind of on, a victory lap. Like this race was just kind of bonus for me. It wasn't, a poor performance wasn't going to ruin my ranking. And it was just one moment. It was on this type of terrain that I really excel at. It was, steep, third class. So where you kind of are putting a hand down to stabilize yourself. Like it's a bit steep and like just really technical. So you're not necessarily running.
Does that class 3 level, is that consistent with what you see in the hiking community of class 1, 2, and 3? So I'd encourage folks to go look up class 3 routes and see what they look like, and then go back and understand that you're not just ascending and accomplishing these. You're racing and running through class 3 technical terrain, which you've been at that point you were accustomed to. You had great success in it. You'd won the U.S. series. Was this your second time in Norway at this event, or the first time?
This is the first time. Yeah, I had never been to Norway this far north. And it was, yeah, like up in the Arctic Circle in Tromsø. Yeah, so it was my first time, which is like I really loved going to races where I can explore a new place that I've never been and on my own 2 feet. And it's just the best gift because I would just get to, even though it was a race and competition, I was taking it seriously. I just had so much fun doing that. And so like in the middle of this race, I remember like kind of reaching this point where you're rising up onto this ridge. It's called Humperocken Ridge for this third class terrain. And I love it. It's like, I was smiling. I remember I was having such a good time and like, feeling like I was getting stronger because it's like that type of terrain, like the steep rocky stuff that I excel at. And I remember seeing a photographer friend of mine, and he yelled to me in encouragement. And as I rounded the corner, the next thing I knew is that I was in the air and the horizon was not where it was supposed to be. It was upside down. And in that moment, everyone says it's like, time literally slowed down, and I felt like I was floating above myself, watching myself fall and telling myself calmly that I was falling, that I needed to brace myself for impact, and that this was it, is that I was dying. And that kind of repeated itself for 5-6 times. I don't remember exactly how many because I think I passed out at some point until I reached a stop on the hillside.
Which I read was about 150 feet.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
So pretty far ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you come to a very abrupt ending of that sky, as my daughter once told me when we were skiing, that sky ground kind of a phenomenon, and ended up badly injured on the trail.
Right. And so thankfully, it happened during a race. And so people saw what happened. And so they were able to, and thankfully it was in Europe. So, they have mountain rescue teams kind of on standby. And so someone was able to, Manu Par, this racer, scrambled down to me, and he kind of began the rescue operation. And then from there, like a helicopter was called, and
you were very fortunate because I think I read in the book that Manu, is that his name?
Manu, yeah.
Manu, that that he was also wilderness trained and experienced in either wilderness first responder or something of that nature, right?
Exactly, the equivalent. And so his profession is being a mountain guide. So he has all the certifications. And so that was extremely lucky. And not only I was in Norway, and normally Norway is usually overcast or like quite, foggy. And it was really lucky that day there were 0 clouds. And so a helicopter could actually fly and find where I was.
And what was the elevation there? Do you know?
So, it's at sea level, but it's different because even though they're at these mountains are at sea level, these granite peaks like rise from the sea, 3,000 feet, like straight up. So, or like 3,000 or 4,000 feet. So the Humperocken Ridge couldn't have been more than 4,000 feet in elevation. But it's just really gnarly terrain, like granite rocks. And so even when a helicopter is there hovering by the ridge line, as they lower like a little cable with the doctor and a cot on it, it's extremely dangerous because the debris is kind of flying around, and like
sure.
Rocks can potentially fall down on where everyone is.
So you were extracted by the helicopter, and you were taken to a local emergency care hospital there.
Yeah, so thankfully Tromsø, the city itself, it's has a university hospital, and so that's where I was taken to. And I think it was only like 2.5 hours from when I fell to when I was able to be in the hospital. So the rescue was able to happen quite quickly.
Give the folks a sense as to the extent of your injuries at that time, or at least known extent.
Yeah. So that was crazy because like during that whole operation, the rescue operation, I was just, I was in so much pain, and I still thought that I was dying. Like I didn't know what had happened. And it wasn't until probably 2 days later when I was in the hospital that I had realized that the accident had happened to me. I remember people coming in and seeing me and talking about some accident that someone had fell, but I was thinking like in a haze of like drugs and delirium that I just had no idea what had happened. But it wasn't until my mother had come to see me that second day in the hospital in Norway that I literally like looked at myself and I realized like, oh my gosh, like that was me that fell. And in total, I had broken 14 bones. And up until this point, I had never broken a bone before. So not only was the feeling foreign to me, I had broken, both wrists, 5 ribs, my back, both feet, my right foot in a couple places. And I had just like so many cuts everywhere. I think even in the second day, like my hair was still in the braid that I had done for race day, but we literally couldn't get the braid out because it was caked in blood. And like my, they had shaved parts of my head to like, make sure I had like sutures. I think they ended up putting like staples in because it was like easier. And like my legs were just like cut up. Miraculously, my legs weren't broken. I didn't have like a skull fracture, which was
Yeah,
insane.
that's incredible.
Like, so granted, I mean, they were extensive. Yeah, they were still relatively, it was relatively okay. And actually the biggest injury was this Liz Franck injury that I had in my foot, which it's basically a ligament that makes the arch, which is, basically makes the integrity of your foot. And so the doctor described it to me as a career ending injury, especially for a runner.
Right. I mean, I think that's and you talk in depth about recovery process and the comeback process. The book, really speaks to it and other challenges we've overcome. But almost the irony of probably the most extensive injury that you suffered being one that would affect your sport.
Right. And that was, I mean, all the injuries it was incredibly difficult because they all threatened my mobility and, my day-to-day life. But the Liz Franck injury was just one that really, basically I felt threatened like at my core because it threatened my ability, and, I questioned whether or not I'd be able to return to this thing that brought me so much joy and that I loved so much.
Did they have to perform surgery on that injury immediately?
So this actually was missed in Norway, and it wasn't until I flew back to Colorado 10 days after the accident that I went to go see some specialists at UC, University of Colorado Denver campus, and they diagnosed it. And so then they're like, okay, because it had only, had almost been 2 weeks at this point. So, they wanted me to, so I had to go into surgery the next day. And it was kind of just like, do or die, because it's basically like, yeah, this is a career ending injury, but we have to surgically repair it, because if not, it's like, if it goes undiagnosed, it'll heal improperly. And then I also had to have another surgery the fall. Like, so I was in the country Monday, saw the doctors Tuesday, in surgery Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I had 2 more surgeries on my wrists to reset the bones because they were healing improperly. I had like an external fixation on my left wrist with like rods sticking out, and they had to take that out. And yeah, so it was a pretty intense first couple weeks.
Not just a couple of weeks. It went on for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's so much to gain out of the book. And if you don't mind me kind of probing a little bit and asking,
Yeah.
when you're going through, and I think this is something that resonates with people as a whole, not just folks who are runners or even athletes, but just dealing with some of the challenges that life presents, especially when it takes you off the rails, right? When here you are really at what appears to be the peak of your career. Maybe not even. You're probably still in ascending in what felt like maybe unlimited potential right there. And life has a way of throwing you these curves, and you're swept off the rails. You're dealing with recovery from injuries that they're kind of complicated because they oftentimes, you mentioned, it wasn't just one surgery, it was repeated surgeries to try to fix them. I think one of the things that really struck me in the book, and I wanted to ask you about this, you obviously were surrounded by a lot of really great people. You had found some tremendous practitioners, and you do a phenomenal job in the book of really promoting or applying value to them. But what I picked up was that instead of just referring to these people who are in your life, on your team for a period of years, by their titles or as a practitioner or as a therapist, you've developed a very personal relationship with all these individuals. I think it's really commendable the way you personalize them in the book. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's one of the most special, I think, results or silver linings of this recovery and this accident is that I think many people can describe themselves as lone wolves, or like feeling that they're almost kind of alone in this world until they find the people that make them feel at home. And that's very much been my story. And I've always been okay with that. Like I've always been okay with, this is ever since I was a little girl, like the little girl, like playing in the dirt, gathering worms for the family fishing trip when, like even my dad didn't want to do that, or like certainly my sister didn't want to, but like that's okay. Like I was fine doing that by myself. And that's always kind of how I viewed the pursuits that I've taken since then, is that as long as I was happy and I enjoyed it, then I'm okay if that means that I'm alone. And so I always kind of thought like I did find my people through trail running. But I never really for the first time in my life throughout this injury recovery, I really found a community. And the difference is that, my people in the trail running community, like they were seeing me at my best self. But I think it's to really develop a community and have these intimate relationships and very personal relationships, I had to be able to show up to these people at very raw and vulnerable times in my life. And I had to be able to show that side of me that wasn't just put together and happy and, optimistic and smiley like I normally am on a trail, doing this thing that I loved so much. It was, showing up in tears to my PT Matt, and, having the courage to still show up to PT that day, and having him help me, or calling my friend when I didn't have any motivation to get out the door that day, and knowing that if they were there that they would help me. And through all of that vulnerability and I think the courage that I found that I had to kind of show up honestly, no matter if I was happy or struggling. And I think more importantly, when I was struggling, it allowed me to connect with people on a real genuine in a real genuine way. And it's developed friendships that will last a lifetime.
There's some incredibly profound moments and quotes in your book, and I want to refer to a couple of them here. Well, one is the fact that personal rediscovery of self and then being comfortable with who you have become through this whole process. And you just, I think you kind of reiterated there that you had to individually allow yourself to become vulnerable in this process. But through the vulnerability, through the recovery, and as part of that comeback, you're evolving, and you're still battling what is thought to be or will be a comeback to the sport and the things that you've always loved. But what you get out of it, and you continue, I'm sure, to experience is this this evolution of who you are, right? And the fact that you can now be comfortable with who you are today. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, and it's not what I expected, and it's so funny because, before the accident, I think I would describe myself as, like it almost was becoming, Hillary Allen, endurance athlete for the North
Right.
Face. It was like one sentence, like that was my identity.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
that's actually quite dangerous. If I was only allowing myself to be defined in one way, to whomever, right? And I think anyone who really knows me, they know that I'm much more than that. I know that I'm much more than that. But it's, if you constantly, work on this perception of who you are, or like, constantly put this one side out to the world, your identity can get kind of mixed into that and you rely upon it. I certainly was. And so when I was dealing with all of this recovery, and I think you can sense that in the book, this book is less about a physical recovery story, but more about the resilience and the mental side and the self-discovery that I went through, because this accident was far more than just, breaking 14 bones and this ligament fracture and working my way back to running. It's where I really truly experienced a complete loss of identity and a loss of self. And I used that recovery period as an opportunity to rediscover that sense of self and to, work on being vulnerable and figuring out the real meaning of why I wanted to run in the first place, not because it was linked to my identity, but because it was almost like the air that I breathe. It's something that, is part of me, and it makes me a better human. And it's not the only thing that makes me feel like, that makes me feel alive. There's many other things.
Yeah, and you get that in the book. And I think it's probably relevant to say that you had mentioned that the setbacks were more than just 14 broken bones. The comeback was more than that. But if it's okay, I want to take folks back because as a human being and as a young female, you also were challenged with with other things that I think people can relate to that may not have anything to do with ultra running, but an eating disorder that you discovered while in college.
Right.
And we're still working to overcome that.
Yeah. And this is something that I think that, I chose to be very honest about this in my book, and just in general, because I think it's not just something that, it's something that I think a lot of people, not just women, but I think, a lot of people experience. And, I think it's definitely a reflection of your community. For me in particular, it was in this, tennis environment in college. And, I'm more of a, jean shorts, cut off shirt kind of woman, not like a tennis dress skirt kind of person. And so that brought about like different, different pressures. And, I kind of got sucked into this unhealthy environment. And what actually helped save me was trail running. And the ultimate irony of this is that in trail running now, skirts are becoming a thing, and
Right.
I'm not okay with it. But so regardless of that, but I think this is something, it's kind of like a trauma or an accident. It's like this accident is going to be a part of me for forever. And just like an eating disorder, when you recover from it, it's, it's not something that you just forget, right? It's there. And so, but for me, it was, I had other healthier coping tools and, mental coping tools that when I had recurring thoughts, like I would know that, okay, I'm feeling this because of this way. And I could think my way out of it, or I had tools to kind of work my way through it. But I wrote about this, in the book as a way to also be thankful for my recovery and my process, because I wasn't a frail human or a frail runner. I was strong and I nourished myself. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I survived that fall and why
Yeah.
I was able to recover. I mean, it was because I was healthy and because I was fueling my body appropriately for, the physical demands, that I was demanding of it. And I, wanted to write that as, kind of to be an example and to give a voice to, these things that are happening in the world of endurance sports, and especially for young girls or women, and anyone who's struggling with that kind of pressure of that
Yeah.
you have to look a certain way,
Well, yeah, you mentioned in the book, so that body image thing. First of all, I think getting back to your point, the fact that you point out, you illustrate, and you referred to as tools, the fact that you were looking at and you had the logic applied that if I'm going to ask my body to perform in the spectrum of trail running or whatever it is, it requires a certain amount of care and attention and nutrition. And that took over from the battle of the body image thing, or at least helped combat the body image thing. Exactly. But you were in a race. Was it in Italy when a race director or somebody interviewed you and asked you had beaten, or maybe you were competing against one of the top other female runners and had commented on your body image at that point, right?
Yeah, so this is a race in Madeira. So it's actually a Portuguese
Spain.
island,
Okay.
but yeah, so close. And it's basically I had won this. I had gotten second, and I had beaten Anna Frost, who she's like notorious. She's this powerhouse, and one of the winningest female ultra runners out there. And I had just had this incredible performance, finished only a couple minutes behind the first place woman, who was petite. She was a different size than me. She was like 5'2", and I'm like 5'9", and we just had different body shapes and forms. But like, I had this guy came across the finish line behind me and he even comments, he's like, how do you run so fast if you weigh so much? And I'm like, are you really asking me this? And then, so, and ironically, this is funny because I included in the book this blog post that I wrote about that moment. And this is also why I think writing is so powerful. It can be cathartic, and it's one of the coping mechanisms that I use to express honestly how I'm feeling, so that those emotions don't, take me over and, get the best of me.
Yeah, it's a great story and a great testament to. And I think you did a phenomenal job of of illustrating and providing to others that might be challenged with that. How you apply tools or demonstrating some tools or logic that you used. And I know you had some professional help in there as well, but I think that point in. During that race, and that comment speaks to, one of the challenges so many people face, or some of the perceptions that are out there on body image and performance. I'll admit that, I've become victim of it myself, and in the midst of, especially in the world of endurance sports, in running. You cannot judge a runner by their physique.
Mm-hmm.
You just simply can't.
It's so funny because, and especially trail running, because it requires different strengths, and it's also mental strength. And I think it's like not letting yourself be defined in one dimension. It's like it's too narrow, because even as a scientist, like even if 10 athletes line up on the start line and they all have the same VO2 max and all like these numbers, one person's going to win, and it's probably the person who is like, the best problem solver and who's like, quote unquote, more mentally tough.
Yeah. And the problem solving piece, not to be, underestimated in the world of endurance sports, as many folks know, but, being able to, one of the comments you made in here, and, I was so excited to hear, because it's kind of a mantra that I've kept for myself, in that people talk about how powerful the mind is over the body. You made a quote here. I believe it was that the mind follows the body and the body follows the mind. And I've often tried to illustrate the same thing, that if you can focus on empowering the body and build a powerful body, that process through the suffering and the training and the discipline helps conjure and build a strong mind. And then the other aspects of ultra running and endurance sports, the problem solving, which you mention a lot in the book, and you obviously have a lot of skills, and I'm sure it comes from your analytical and your scientific mind. But that's so key to understanding you as a human being and what's going on physiologically with you while you're out there and you're suffering at those levels, and trying to piece the whole thing together. Because a simple thing like too little nutrition or too much water or whatever it might be can be a game ender for you, in a moment. And
right. And that's my favorite thing, is like to problem solve. And I think it's like, it just goes to this, the scientific aspect of like, okay, because in an ultra distance race, you're racing for hours. It's not like a 5K or like, 100-meter dash, it's like, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, especially when you're on trail and like, so I like that part of it. There's like a strategy and, like you can't give up kind of thing.
I would say that I'm just guessing, but I would assume that your intellectual ability to problem solve probably was a real strength in your performance as an ultra runner.
I think so.
I'm sure it was, and I want to. And if it wasn't, or if it isn't for others, it is for you, because you lean on it as a strength, right? Yeah, I've used
exactly.
it. Yeah. I love the reference in here you make, during the comeback, if you will. There are two things I want to kind of hit on that I think are going to help folks. And I can think of some people that I know right now that are going through some tough times. And one was a quote from, I think it was one of the therapists that you were working with, that said, let me find it here. I think, if you honor your process, if you honor your process or that process, you will welcome, let me get this right. If you honor your process, you will welcome out the other side stronger, different, and with more knowledge, or something to that effect. And I think that was a brilliant response to, at a point in time you were struggling. Do you remember that period of recovery?
Yeah. And this honor your process thing was kind of a mantra that I had taken like early on, because I just realized how not straightforward it was. And as much as I wanted it to be linear. I wanted, it to just move along in a straight line, and always there's progression and improvement. And that's just like not how it happened. And so, this honor the process was a way to kind of like accept all of that, and to deal with kind of the unknown and the messy, and know that I was kind of like coming out different on the other side, but that wasn't a bad thing, that was actually good, because in order to change and become better, you have to be different, and you have to, allow for that change. And yeah.
Yeah, I know you. I know you've got reference in here to one of the chapters on. You referenced the Japanese word Bushido.
Yeah.
And I don't want to steal too much of that or reveal too much, but I think during that whole process of what one of the things that reminded me of when you were talking about the reference of the Bushido, meaning the way of the warrior, and the process that the samurais, the ideology that they had taken on. That was a big part of your mental strength. You leaned on that. Just tell the folks for a minute where that reference came from for you.
Yeah, so that came from actually my first pair of like running shoes that I really liked. It was, sorry, North Face. This was like before it was actually required for us to, before North Face had trail shoes. So it was the Bushido, the La Sportiva Bushido, and they just kind of felt like a tennis shoe. They felt like really snug and nice. And I just felt secure, and I was like, what is this? Like the Bushido, the way of the warrior. And that's what I found out that it was. And it just became this, just like, I loved what it represented. Like every time I kind of laced on my shoes, I saw this metaphor, and I saw, what that really meant. If it was, putting on your almost, your armor. And I was able to kind of apply that, in hard times of the recovery, but then also other times when I was, facing injury again, or just a hard moment that, I had within me this way of the warrior and this strength. And I just kind of had to go search at the back of my closet to, dust off the armor and then put it back on again.
Yeah. You made another reference, I think, for folks that have, maybe now at a point where they're struggling with something, trying to overcome either an injury or some other hardship, in that you expected the process to be linear. And I think that's a problem for so many folks to face, in any type of recovery process or comeback, or, dealing with, because it doesn't always, I have a friend who you probably know from your endurance world. His name's Bill Moley. He's a veterinary doctor here do you know Bill?
Yeah.
and I'd come off of an injury a couple of years ago, and an emergency surgery thing that shook me and almost took me. And I hadn't seen him. I come back to the gym, and it was a couple of weeks, and he said, "Hey, where you been? I haven't seen you." And I said, I told him what happened, and he looked at me and he said, "You're a young guy. You'll get over this, and then there'll be something else." And I think he's right. I mean, who doesn't know better than Bill, right? He's 83 and he's still out there doing this stuff. But more to come on Bill Moley. But point being, it just doesn't always work out that way, right? You come out of a hardship or a surgery or a setback, and you expect the recovery to be pretty linear in its process, and something else develops, or maybe it's not happening as quickly. But to be able to honor that process that you're going through, I think opens you up and changes your perspective to allow not just healing, but new discoveries and new growth to happen. And I think if folks that are in those positions, as you were able to overcome, get stuck looking for that linear progression of recovery, you may miss the growth opportunities, the advancements, and the other things that going through the process will give you. I think I'll share a reference to you. It was something I was thinking about in the world of samurai sword making. They, the process is incredibly long and enduring. But when they heat the steel and they forge the steel and they're pounding on the metal, you know this stuff from your scientific insights, but it expands the ions in the metal and releases carbon and other things, and that helps in the strengthening process. But if the forging of that steel is the only process in attempting to create strong steel, you harden it, but it becomes brittle. Mm-hmm. So it may be good for one strike or impact, but it can't sustain long and enduring strength. But the tempering, where they're putting the steel into the cooling process and bringing it out and manipulating the steel, through that tempering is where the real strength in the steel comes from. And I think you've illustrated that tremendously in your recovery for for people. One of the other things that I wanted you to kind of talk about was when you did go through this long and enduring comeback, you actually had another setback where you're out for a training run, and did you break an ankle?
Yeah, I did. And I mean, to kind of go back with what you're saying, you're just, I mean,
Sure.
you're the tempering of the steel. It's like you're describing resilience, and that's yeah, I would say like that's basically what the recovery process was for me. Just kind of working on that resilience and, not letting these things break me, but, becoming stronger, from these different setbacks. And that's exactly what happened with this ankle break. Like I said, like what your friend said to you, it's like, okay, you're good now, but it's something will happen again. And it's just kind of like sharpening the tools in my toolbox so that like the next time it does happen, I have the resources and I also have the skills necessary to get through it. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean it's any easier, but it just means that, it's like there's kind of proof there that I've done this before and I can do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes you out of that why me moment, which we all have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's easy to get there, but you start to become acquainted with the resilience and the process, and that's where your real strength comes from. So you come back from that, and you go back to Norway.
Yeah. It's just something that I really wanted to do. I wanted to go back there just to, to kind of close the loop I knew I wanted to go back there eventually. But going back there was just important to me to be able to like have a closure on this place and to not really prove that I could do it, but just I wanted to heal through going back there. And I mean, thankfully I was able to write about the process and, do the race. But for me, it was more about just that healing process and like finding closure and going back to this place that nearly killed me and really just like, proving that like now, I was back there, but I was a different person and I had kind of new knowledge and strength to be able to go visit this place and, face the fear that, it might happen again or, but I wanted to go back there and have that experience with Manu and, with my mother and, yeah.
I think I read in there that yeah, and I thought this was very insightful as well about the comeback reference that you hadn't come back. Um, it wasn't a comeback for you. It was is that you had come back better, improved, and new, right? Um,
Yeah.
Instead of just it being about the comeback, it's I'm here and I'm an entirely new human being at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because the book title is Out and Back, but that's why I love it, just because I went out there and I've come back with all of these new experiences and I'm a new person because of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a phenomenal read or listen. I would encourage folks to grab it. I know I know it's going to be popular among certainly among the endurance athlete um, world, but there are a lot of people that can learn from the very insightful lessons that you shared uh, through your rise of the success early on in your career. And I think what is this, incredible metamorphosis of experience and success you've had, uh, beyond that through the recovery and the comebacks. And you share a lot of, very hard and deep moments in the book. Um, so yeah, great stuff. I really appreciate you sharing. Uh, are there are there any takeaways that you think outside of reading the book, of course, that you'd like to be able to share with some listeners, that we may not have hit upon on the comeback and the rediscovery process?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that, like, I think it's more than just a recovery story. It's more of just a testament to human resilience. And I think, if anything, um, really, I think anyone can relate to this story just because everyone struggles with something. And I want to use my story as a way to invite others to view challenges as a means to learn and to become new and to become better, and to not view them as these impossible, insurmountable, walls, or setbacks, but opportunities for growth and for change.
So what's Hillary Allen up to these days?
Well, I mean, promoting the book and yeah, just trying to kind of spread that word of, resilience, and I'm sure there will be races soon. But until then, until the world kind of calms down, I've just, just personal projects and, doing things I love, whether that's on a bike or running, my local mountains in Colorado, and, local projects as the high country opens up. And yeah.
How's training going?
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually struggling with an injury right now, so it's great that I have this book to take care of, to keep me occupied. But yeah, so I mean, it all comes full circle, right? But
well, and I know you're a holistic athlete, so whatever the injury is, I'm sure you're working around it in other ways to
exactly
find some training. Hillary Allen, thank you greatly for being a guest. I want to encourage folks to go out and find your book on Amazon and all the other popular places they can find it. Hillary Allen, Out and Back, A Runner's Story to Survival Against All Odds. It was a real pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
All right, have a great one.